Hello, everyone. It's Debbie, and I'm going to share my presentation today that I'm giving for KetoCon. And it is 3 different presentations in one. So I just want to touch on some topics because I'm not going to be able to get through them all because I was not able to figure out what to focus on because I don't know my audience who's attending in 30 minutes. That's a little challenging for me. That is the overachiever. So here is what I'm going to do with you. So let's do a little slide presentation and let's go through some of the things I'm going to talk about today. Fueling and training the low carb athlete is the main focus, but I'm going to tie in the elements of the holistic method. First of all, let's talk a little bit about me because a lot of people don't know who I am because I'm not a big social media person. I don't like doing social media videos and all the stuff you're supposed to do to build your brand. So I am a personal trainer for, since college. So long time. I got into exercise science and health coaching and all that in my early 20s and was always working at fitness director in college, and then got into working as a personal trainer as I was 25 years old. And I started down this road, just always interested in nutrition and exercise and health since college. So when I got into working out more, I decided also that I enjoyed racing and I liked running races. And then I started doing dance skin triathlon in, 1995. I feel really old. It was early on sprint triathlon. So I thought, hey, I can do this. I'm pretty good. And I did a 3-day bike ride with a client in the San Juan Islands off Seattle. And I really enjoyed it. So I realized I'm pretty good and have fun with endurance sports. So then I had friends that were training for Ironman Canada every year. Long story short, I did my first Ironman in 2001. I also started doing long distance endurance events as Seattle to Portland bike ride and ride around Mount Rainier and all this long distance, high volume bike rides and running marathons and all that side of the endurance world sports early on. And what I'll describe today is kind of my journey. And I wrote a lot of it in my book, Life is Not a Race, because I found out I was doing a lot of everything. And over the years, I created the holistic method. There are 8 elements to be fit and healthy from the inside out. And I started a podcast as a co-host with John Smith in 2011 called Fit, Fat, Fast. So I've been in this low carb world for a long time, not really knowing it was keto back then, but it was just low carb. So I started doing heart zone training long time ago. Stan Skin Triathlon, Sally Edwards, who created heart zone training. I worked with her and started being a heart zone training coach and helping with dance skin triathlons a long time ago. My first marathon was the San Diego Rock and Roll Marathon in 2000. And then I started doing Ironmans, as I said, in 2001. And I did 15 of them by the time I had to end my career in 2012, 2013. But along that journey, I was doing all the right things that we talk about now. Low carb, I was training maffetone heart rate, max aerobic function heart rate. Maffetone is 180 minus your age, finding that fat burning state. I was doing metabolic efficiency testing starting in 2005. So I was doing testing to find out where is your fat burning heart rate ranges, where's your anaerobic threshold, and figure out how to match your training with those heart rate zones so you're more efficient at burning fat. But we were not talking so much as how to change how you're eating to burn more fat as much as we do now. And then looking at stress, how stress impacts your ability to burn fat. So much we know now that I didn't know then, and it all kind of makes sense more so now. But I dabbled into figuring out the zone diet. What led me to figuring out lower carb is best for endurance sport is I wasn't losing weight. I was trying to figure out why I was doing these long distance bike rides and started running, marathons and triathlons but I wasn't really losing weight. I was still kind of heavier. And this is way back in 2001. I started teaching spin class. I teach spin class on a Saturday, for example. And then I met some friends to go for a bike ride. We're training for Seattle to Portland bike ride, a 200-mile bike ride. And I thought, well, how am I supposed to eat all this sugar and these drinks people are telling us to have if I keep eating this 300 calories an hour? I have fat on my body I want to access. How do I burn it? So I did this way back 2001, 2003, I don't even know, sometime around there. And I realized now that I couldn't just stop being a carb burner. And so I went for a bike ride this one day. I thought, okay, I'm just not going to eat anything. My typical healthy bagel, orange juice, and banana. I thought I wouldn't have anything after spin class, and force my body to burn fat for fuel and go for this long bike ride towards Mount Rainier. Well, I had pretty much, I guess, bonked and had to be have a nap on the side of the road at Enumclaw Fairgrounds. My friends continued on, and I just had no energy. And someone gave me a Cliff Bar, which has tremendous amount of carbohydrates in it, and I came back to life. And then I had my carb fuel and I was ready to go, and I was strong riding all the way back to our starting point. So that was kind of my beginning of my journey of doing a low carb fueling for an athlete. When I started getting certified as a coach, USA Triathlon coach, Bob Seebehor spoke about what I kept thinking. Why are we eating all these sugars when we have fat for fuel? And we'll get into, 40,000 calories of stored fat versus 2,000 calories of stored glycogen fuel source. So that's a big part of my journey. It was he's saying what I kept trying to experiment with the last 5 years. How is that possible to burn more fat? I was doing metabolic efficiency training, exercise, but I wasn't matching my nutrition. I was still, dabbling in the zone diet. But before then I was doing the healthy carb diet, right? That we're taught that was healthy. I was healthy Debbie. So then I started doing the bulletproof coffee and the low carb, high fat food plan. And I started doing fasted exercise and all of that. So long time ago, I was doing Ironmans. This was my last year in 2012. I kept getting faster over the years. So definitely my metabolic efficiency was amazing over the years. I did 15 Ironmans. I would do push-ups at the finish line. And that last year I did world championship for 70.3 in Vegas and did well, even though it was 100 something degrees. I did Ironman Hawaii and did a great time for myself with hard weather conditions that year. And, my husband and I had got him to do racing, and we had all these plans. So he's going to start doing some triathlons for fun because I was always doing them. Well, lessons learned. I had adrenal fatigue set in about 2013 month of March. Suddenly I gained 30 pounds since that January. It just happened, I think, March to June, because that year, 2013, I did a marathon, Carlsbad Marathon in January, and then I did a Bellingham, this 50K trail run. And then March, I suddenly was biking one day and I had no strength at all. I couldn't continue on. I had to pretty much walk my bike home and was crying. And that was the beginning and the end of my beginning of my fatigue issues and health issues and the end of my career as a competitive athlete. So even though it's almost 10 years ago, I'm finally able to focus on sharing my story now. I think partially because I owned my fitness studio until 2019. In October, first I closed it and went to Kona to recover for 2 weeks. But I was busy those 10 years focusing on trying to survive as a small business owner. And I think it's till the past 2 years, I'm able to focus on what happened to me the past 15 years and how to share it with you to help prevent you from going down that path as I did. So some of my mantras are less is more. We'll talk about the Goldilocks effect. N=1 is a big part. Variation and everything. Positive mindset, self-care, self-love. Listen to your intuition, your red flags, because when I had my adrenal exhaustion, HPA axis dysfunction that hit me in March, it didn't just happen that day. It was built up because you have this high ramped up cortisol levels, hormone levels, super elevated, your adrenaline for so long. And then it's like a leaky faucet. It keeps dripping. You use it all up. And then that your well is empty and you don't have enough. And you get that communication problems with the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, adrenal gland. That whole system gets broken and sluggish. So then we have those low, if you get a Dutch test, your cortisol levels are below the range. So you may have this optimal cortisol melatonin rhythm, kind of what used to be called adrenal fatigue. When you're elevated above that, you're kind of high, you're overcharged, you're a little overexcited all the time. And then you can't sustain that. It's not sustainable. So then we have this low level that you're sluggish, you're tired. So there's a whole progression. So today there's so much I'd love to talk about, but that's why I have a podcast to talk about these topics. And, maybe I'll do more solo episodes sharing this information that I've brought together in my slides and my presentations. But chronic stress versus acute stress, metabolic flexibility, inflexibility, still being able to burn carbs as your backup engine and shift back and forth. And then sometimes, we're looking at now, if you're fat adapted, are you able to still burn carbs? Are you stuck in only burning fat for some athletes? So lots of information. We can talk about female athletes, fasted exercise fueling and training tips and how to time your nutrition for a race another time, but we can kind of pick and choose what areas. But I put all these slides into ebooks. If you head to debbiepotts.net, free resources, you'll be able to find that. So metabolic flexibility, we know by now, most of you know that the carb tank, say, is 2,000 calories. The fat storage tank, we have, say, 80,000 calories. And low carb, high fat, what you hear about for the people that have metabolic issues, some obesity, insulin resistance, they're going very low carbohydrate, 50 grams a day. And athletes, we'll talk another time about a reset or, finding your sweet spot of how many carbs you can tolerate and still burning fat, but very low carb, 20 to 50, or some people doing that. But as an athlete, we can still be fat adapted and showing ketosis around 100 up to 130 grams a day. And some people can do 200 to 300 grams of carbs a day, some elite athletes, and still be in ketosis. And we'll talk about that too, because we're finding you don't want to be in ketosis isn't an all the time thing. Everything is on, off, on, off. So metabolic flexibility is ability to use carbs as a fuel only when we need to use them. And when we're going for long periods of time without food, we're able to use that fat for fuel. We're having that ability to dip into the fat storage and break that down for fuel. So in some studies, we have the high carb diet versus low carb diet. Those athletes, I think this one was from the FASTER study, they're burning a higher percentage of fat over carbohydrates. And we can see when you do metabolic efficiency testing, it's really fascinating to do. I love doing testing. You can find out where your metabolic crossover point is. So where that carb usage goes up at what heart rate point, what speed, and where your fat drops down. So that's a great way if you can get a metabolic testing on a treadmill or bike at a location near you, you can find your metabolic crossover point. Where do you burn the most fat and training at what heart rate? So we can individualize that, personalize your exercise program and your training fuel plan. So S Fuels is here at the KetoCon Expo this year, and we'll hopefully do some more things with them, but they are focused on endurance athletes and really giving them fuel for training and racing. So we talk a lot about training low carbohydrate and then adding in carbs when you're racing at higher heart rate. If you're just doing, low heart rate in a race, you're not pushing yourself, it's going to be a different fuel plan. But if you're endurance athlete, you want to train the body to burn fat first and be more fat adapted athlete versus typical sugar burner eating all those sugary drinks and bars and gels. So with S Fuels there, the same focus is teaching you how to go longer and have more energy. You require less food and fuel when you're fat adapted, but even in your workouts, you don't need to take anything but water and sea salt. And a lot of times we can add in some extra fuel when we're going longer, but it's just a lot different fuel plan when you're fat burner. And then Peter Defty's another mentor. He talks a lot in his program called OFM, Optimal Fat Metabolism, that it's bio-individuality. We're not, as I always say, there's not one size fits all approach. We're not the same 100%. So we have to individualize the program. But as we go through the fat adapted process, once you're at that level, we can focus on making sure you have good stomach and gut health, the proper training, the hydration. Vespa is a product, B propolis, that can help give you a little bit more boost before your workout to keep you burning fat longer. And so they have a lot of great information on their website in their videos, but Peter's really good at saying, you know, it's not saying we're keto, it's optimal fat metabolism. The goal as an endurance athlete to be low carb is to improve your ability to burn fat longer. Same with what S Fuels is saying, going longer. So showing that you're burning ketones is a different conversation, but when you're in a long triathlon or running a marathon, you might not need to show nutritional ketosis. So you can have that extra fuel source ketones if you need more brain focus, you're not able to concentrate, but a lot of times it's just taking more sea salt and having a little bit of sugar towards the end of a race. So we'll get to this in another seminar, but stress is a big part of my story. Stress, EMF, circadian rhythm, imbalances, those are all impacted as carbohydrates to impact your performance. So fat is your fuel. So teaching you individual needs, fat is your fuel. So as we're saying, we need less carbohydrates during long races. We can cut down on how much we have to take with us. But I think the biggest thing is the GI stress. You know, when I started racing Ironmans, the first few years, I was pretty much throwing up so much on the bike because I was trying to consume all these 500 calorie drinks in my bottle, and I'd have them marked off how much to take every hour. And I kept following this recommended fuel plan, and I ended up just throwing it all up and kind of starting over. We used to say you feel better when you get the throw up out of you, but it's having that fuel tank. When I was fat adapted and, you know, training by heart rate back then, but then I was taking in so many calories, I didn't need it. I wasn't using it. So I just get bloated and it wouldn't go anywhere. So that's a benefit of using fat as your fuel, and then strategic use of carbohydrates to have that energy. So we're not showing nutritional ketosis all the time. Competitive racing, higher intensity workouts, you will be burning glycogen, stored carbohydrates. And if you are a highly active individual, you will use fat for fuel till a certain point, and then you want to do that strategic carb fueling. If it's weekday, depends on your weekday workouts, but racing, you have that timing of when to add in carbs, tapering, adding, and it's not a lot of carb because it's still way lower than a normal, typical standard American diet, but 50 carbs to 130 carbs, but then maybe you go 130 to 150 up to 200 carbs the day or two before. So you're not doing low carb, but you're not doing the typical standard American diet, regular carb fueled athlete food plan. So the holistic method, how I like to coach people to be fit and healthy from the inside out is nutrition, exercise, sleep, stress management, movement and mobility, digestion and gut health, hydration, and one of my favorites, happiness and play. Now, all these elements impact the other. So if we don't get good sleep, we're not going to recover well. So we're not going to exercise well. If we're tired, you probably make poor food choices. If you're grumpy and tired, you're probably not happy and having a good time. And so you can see all this impacts other. We want to make sure the mobility workout throughout the day are part of your routine. And so if you're too tired to do anything, you impact your exercise performance, but maybe you just need to do more walking mobility work. So everything is really important to be fit and healthy from the inside out. Now, nutrition, I start people, if they're not fat adapted, on a kind of 3-phase program. And then I work on what you're eating, how, when, why, and where. A lot of people are eating in their car, at their desk. It's really eating, being focused, sitting there, shift into that parasympathetic state, relax, reset, chew your food, eat slowly. It's kind of how the Europeans eat. You know, it's not throwing it in, and how we tend to do when we're eating in our afternoon meal, which is kind of our lunch and dinner at 3 o'clock, 2 o'clock, we have to go back to work. So it's not ideal. We have to always remind ourselves, slow down. You know, it's not chewing everything so fast. So personalized nutrition, what to eat, is something I just want to touch on, but really looking at your ancestry background. Where's your family roots? Where are they from? Looking at genetic SNPs, working on your stress levels, measuring that. Heart rate variability is really important for that. Looking at your sleep data, if you use Oura Ring or Whoop Band, looking at your exercise training program to match your nutrition and exercise, your lifestyle habits, you know, what are you doing all day? And using a continuous glucose monitor and a keto monitor like NutriSense and Keto Mojo, and the metabolic efficiency testing or breath test. How much fat are you burning at rest versus carbohydrates? And then during exercise is great to get that tested. Also, people, you know, free ways just to look at, okay, metabolic diet check record. How do you feel when you eat? Are you eating foods, even if they're low carb, keto, carnivore? How does it feel afterwards? Do you have cravings between meals? Are you feeling bloated? Do you have gas? Do you have headache? Is your energy low? You know, is that good food for you? And then we want to look at your nutrition with your exercise too. See if those are the right choices. Now, we also like to look at genetics. So genetic SNPs, looking at, some people can't tolerate as much saturated fat. So looking at genetic SNPs is their APOE, if it's APOE4, there's PPARG, and different markers in the omega-6 ratio, omega-3. So there's lots to look at. It's kind of interesting to see your epigenetics or the genetics and your lifestyle habits. So fueling the low carb athlete. Now, we want to eat still same nutrient dense, high quality foods. We are training as a low carb athlete to be metabolically efficient to burn fat as our main fuel source, but we still want to get foods, especially as you're exercising, we want to get more nutrition because we're wearing ourselves out, breaking ourselves down more. So this is a great list from my friend Brad Kearns. You can find on his website and his podcast, this more of a carnivore scores ranking of nutrients. So these are the most nutrient rich diet foods. I love what Dr. Gabrielle Lyon talks about all the time. The muscle is an organ of longevity. So as an endurance athlete, we tend to do more catabolic workouts. So we're breaking down versus building up. In anabolic exercise, we want to do more strength training and want to eat more protein to keep those muscles being built up. So there's suggestions of 20 to 40 grams. So like she was saying yesterday, 30 grams, hit that 3 meals. So that could be a shake and 2 meals, but you're focused on getting that 30, 40 grams, especially the first meal and the last meal. Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, she has a great new podcast. So really calculating it out, you know, some suggestions are 0.55 to 0.8 at the minimal range of grams for protein per pound of body weight. I think it's simple. What Dr. Gabrielle Lyon says is, what is your goal body weight? That's how much you want to have in grams a day. So that could be kind of the high end, the low end, you have to experiment. But protein, kind of mapping it out, it's hard to get 40 grams. So I really think that's an important part, to sit down and figure out where your protein's coming from and how you can get real food sources. So that's kind of what I talked about. So nutrition tips, tracking, testing, not guessing, Keto Mojo, NutriSense, or Whoop, getting all these metrics, heart rate variability, making sure your digestion works, your liver, your gallbladder, your microbiome. We work on lab testing for that. And the mindful eating habits, taking 3 deep breaths in and out before you start eating, pausing, chewing, focusing on your daily habits and walking after you eat. So a lot of that I work on with clients. A few different hacks you can do before. I like BioOptimizers, K-Pax, and their Masszymes and their HCl to help digestion. I love Keon Lean is a great one for blood sugar stability. If you have issues with your blood sugar, you might need a little support. Bone broth for gut repair. I love like a bone broth in foods or a cup a day, or having like a 3-day bone broth cleanse sometimes of the month, maybe once a quarter. So ketones, the HVMN, I've done a great podcast with them recently. And there's different suggestions when you could take those. So taking for mental clarity. I have someone doing adventure racing, and I suggested ketones for that because you have that dual fuel for your brain, that you can have some ketones to help if you're starting to feel a little foggy when you're doing a long race, or like they're doing 2-3 day races, and you need a little more ketones. Like if you're racing overnight, might need some of that clarity. And then I think, I like ketones when I'm working and need a little kick in if I'm trying to stay focused. And also when people are doing their fat adaptation phase, a cold keto phase, as they talk about, is taking a shot then. All right, what I like to talk about is intuitive fueling, intuitive training, because I was doing low carb, really low carb, and doing high level of training a day and doing more OMAD and fasted workouts. So I think it's good once you are fat adapted doing this for a while that you start to listen to your body and honor that, and not being so strict. And I think a lot of times we get so driven type A that we don't want to cheat, and we maybe could be eating and benefit ourselves to have something to eat, especially if you're just trying to do OMAD and you don't know when to break your fast. So another topic, but a big important topic to go into sometime. So matching your fueling with your training, S fuels, UCAN, Vespa, F-bomb are great, different fuel sources to look at for clients. Essential amino acids like Keon and bone broth, Paleo Valley, having all this available, LMNT or Relight, it's working on an individualized program, but depending on the duration, what we're going to give them. So fasted exercise is a whole nother section back here. I'll go into another time, but fasted training research, really interesting area that we're learning more about, because you feel better as an athlete, or I do, waking up, going for a run, not have anything but water and some LMNT in it this morning. May have my coffee, and I put some Laird's unsweetened creamer in it. That's non-dairy, but it has some MCTs in it and some functional mushrooms. So I'm not really doing a fasted workout. Fasted workout would be just black coffee or herbal tea or green tea or water, but I put a little splash of something in it. So technically I'm not truly fasted, but I'm still burning fat. So doing a truly fasted exercise training and training in a low glycogen state, so those muscle storage levels are lower, can improve or enhance your fat oxidation and training adaptation. So your body's getting used to having to oxidize more fat for fuel. So training without carbohydrates can increase fat oxidation. And this is from Dr. Dan Plu's information, great training program I'm taking for coaching people. But being aware of warning signs when you do need to add more calories is an important fact. That if you have too much weight loss coming off, your heart rate variability is showing some stress dysfunction there, your sleep isn't so great, and your glucose levels are off, you might need to add something in there. And that's where I think we have to not be so stubborn and be almost, just not thinking clearly that when we should break that fast and have a little something, that we can still continue burning fat with the right type of fuel beforehand. If it's some MCT and some coffee and some collagen, it's not going to take you out of fat burning. And I think it goes back to what's your purpose of doing fasted exercise. I can't eat food and exercise very well, and I don't want to have something heavy. It doesn't feel good, but maybe I'll perform better if I just have a little bit in there, especially the lion's mane and cordyceps. So carb timing is important. The lowest carb meal earlier in the day and post-training, largest carb intake. So this is Dan Plews, Dr. Dan Plews. I'm doing a podcast with them soon. Post-workout carb intake after a high intensity workout can be beneficial. So timing where you put those carbs, and we'll talk about which carbohydrates we're talking about. It's not like saying a loaf of bread and having crappy stuff. It's having more like a potato, a sweet potato, some starchy vegetables. So one thing Rob Wolf has been speaking about, and something I've been thinking about for a while, is what I think what happened to me. I was doing before COVID too much fasting. I would be, not eating till I get home from training clients and running and swimming. And suddenly it's 3 o'clock and I haven't eaten anything but coffee and cream. So that I think can impact your body's performance and putting too much stress on it and causing some hormone issues. So when are you pushing yourself to having too low of energy and we're not having the positive outcomes? So that's what I think is so individualized, and when we need to tweak and course correct with clients to have more positive outcomes and improve performance. So as I said, the big factors we talk about, not eating enough before exercise and not eating anything. Sometimes it's just like having a Vespa or having a little S fuel. So it depends on the workout intensity. So that's where we kind of dial in with the client individually, matching what we're doing to the exercise. And what did you do the day before? What did you eat the night before? So Ben Greenfield suggests having, like, for people that are exercising more often, your nighttime dinner will have more carbohydrates in it, and all day you're more in a ketotic state, and then add them in at night. So if you are doing a fasted workout, that's another kind of more detailed. In the end of the slides, I'll do another show that you can do no carb, no calories, and just do water, coffee. You can take the essential aminos, ketone aminos, and have some of those. You can take some ketone salts, they have a little bit of calories, but ketone IQ, you could take a shot. And then electrolytes, potassium electrolytes. I like LMNT or Reolite. Adrenal cocktail by Jigsaw Health is really good, as the sea salt and some vitamin C. And these are great for fasted workouts. Now, what Ben says is that you should eat a little something after your workout with some healthy carbohydrates if you're going to do another workout in 8 hours. So those people doing a 2-a-day, or like if I run in the morning and then I swim masters at lunch, which is often intervals, depends how hard I push myself if I go anaerobic or not, but you may need to add a little bit of carbohydrates, and that could be just like a few potatoes or with some avocado and an egg or something. I don't know what works for you. That's what we work on with your coach. So fasting in athletes, men, about 12 to 16 hours for intermittent fasting. Ben also like 12 hours for women. I think that's kind of a standard. What we're talking about for females, 12 to 15 hours. If you're premenopausal, you can have the benefit of a longer fast, cell autophagy, doing a 24-hour fast once or twice a month. And that wouldn't be the last week of your cycle. That would be more middle. And so I'm creating a calendar to map that all out for female athletes, when to fast and when to add in that 24-hour fast. And that'd be your rest, exercise, kind of active recovery day. So women, morning fasted easy workouts. You can have some aminos and ketones if you feel like you need a little something. Like I said, I like the Laird's unsweetened creamer in my coffee and have a little bit of that, and that gives me enough, and I don't feel starving. But that's also listening to your intuition. When do you need to have something? And if I kind of feel my stomach grumbling, should I push through it or should I have something? Because some days I eat lunch, usually weekdays, 2 to 3 p.m., and I don't eat again. So if I go exercise at 6 a.m. the next day and I did a hard workout that day, I might feel a little more depleted. So it depends on the day before, what's going to be my energy level requirement the next day. So longer bike rides, for example, you can do a quarter amount of fuel for that day, having Vitargo, Ben likes eating 10 grams to 20 grams of amino acids and ketones, having a scoop of electrolytes, and a slow bleed of carbohydrates from different fuel sources as you can, or S fuels of Vitargo. And then sometimes, longer fasted ride, just have the ketones and aminos electrolytes, so you're semi-depleted. So there's different ways to go about it. Female athletes, a little different. This is what I'm trying to map out, so I'm not going to go into this too much, but limited fasting, high energy levels, high energy output. So we want to match what we're doing with our body. So our body's a little bit working harder, building that progesterone, the end of our cycle, luteal phase. So we want to match that. So we're going to do a little lower intensity week and limit all the stressors as being in strict ketosis and too much fasting and too much hard exercise. So I'm not going to go any more in that fasting, but just want to go into exercise training and how you can match your training, longer endurance, adding fuels like a fat coffee. Strength training you might do fasted or have a little nut butter. If you're doing longer duration, we decide, if you need some fuel, it depends on the intensity, duration. And so Dr. Dan Plews has this great program, Endure, that you can take a course on there and then figure out the fueling based on how long you're going and what sport you're doing, what distance, and duration and intensity, of course, makes a big, huge difference if you're fat burning or anaerobic. And then when you are in the training, do you just have electrolytes each hour, or when is it appropriate to add? And it's, again, individualized, because I sometimes can go for 3 hours not eating anything but electrolytes, and my husband would need a bar or two on a bike ride because he's a lot more muscular, and also depends if we're doing more hills and ride routes that will get our heart rate up, or like here running today, I was more anaerobic probably because it's really hot and humid, and I was doing little pickups towards the end. So I'm going to be burning more carbohydrates. So when to put those carbs in and make it still burning fat and then help your performance is looking at more intuitive fueling and experimenting, and using your glucose meters, doing the Keto Mojo, mark your ketones and can track everything with your Oura ring or whatnot. But this is a study, another seminar we're sharing too, but Dr. Dan Plews went over this one. They did a study on different sports, increased fat oxidation in a 30-second sprint versus a 4-minute sprint, a 20K time trial, and then a 100K time trial. And the performances were measured with a low carb, high fat athletes. Again, that's what I don't like studies. This is only 4-week phase. And so the 20K time trial improved the most, and they had low carb and had low carbohydrate, but there wasn't any change in the 30-second sprint power, and small improvement in the 4-minute sprint power, and small reduction in time in the 100K time trial. So they found in the study that carbohydrate ingestion during exercise was likely beneficial for a fat adapted athlete during high intensity endurance type exercise, 4 by 30 minutes, by 30 seconds, but likely did not benefit from a short sprint or prolonged endurance. So it's so individual based on what distance and intensity you are doing, because obviously you're going to burn more glycogen in a higher intensity workout. So when is it appropriate to add more carbs? It depends. So do you do a nightly refeed or a weekly carb feed? So cyclical keto is a great option for some people. Have one day, like a 5-1-1, as Ben Azadi talks about, is doing a 5-day keto. One day you're doing like a longer fast. That's your 24-hour day fast when appropriate for women, maybe once a month. And then one day that you're getting out of ketosis and having a more carb heavier meal. And that doesn't mean garbage. I mean, it's good stuff. And so one way to do it is if you are doing a workout the next day, you might have more of some athletes need a little more carbohydrates to improve performance. So they might have more berries and starchy vegetables or cruciferous vegetables in their evening meal. And so it could be 100 to 200 grams of carbohydrates for some more bodybuilders and pro athletes. But most of us can just deal with a little bit of carbs and have overnight fast should be normal, 12 to 15 hours, and then keep more of a ketotic state during the day. So keep those carbs low and repeat the next day, or you do it once a week. So you might find that at the end of the day, refuel will restore those glycogen levels and then give you enough energy to wake up and work out. So it's kind of fasted exercise, but your fuel is coming from that dinner the night before. So you can also find out which carbohydrates are best for you to add in that are not going to spike your blood sugar up to 150. So using a NutriSense or Keto Mojo, so you can figure out what happens if you do. Rob Wolf talks about the 7-day carb tolerance test, that you take 50 grams of carbs. It's listed in his book, Wired to Eat, but take first thing in the morning, test, and then will not eat another food at this time, allow just black coffee and water. And then you write down which carb you ate, testing, and the time you ate, set a timer for 2 hours, test your glucose, and record the glucose reading. So you want to find out how high that glucose comes up, or does it not really do much to it, just like no more than 30. So strategic carbs, we can look at which types to have. A lot of people don't do well with rice, but the brown rice, interesting enough, you think it would be better for you than white rice, but brown rice contains the bran, the hull, and the husk, which are where all the anti-nutrients are. So white rice is actually better than brown. Sweet potatoes are yams, taro root, cassava, yucca, tapioca, plantains. Potatoes are nightshades, so some people can't do that. So it's, again, individualized. S Fuels has a good chart of best carbs to use, depends on your intensity, duration, and your hormones. And then Vespa, I like to chew some carbs on a longer run. If I'm going to go a little harder, I can take that and burn fat, as I've done some studies recently that they're just testing people fasted with Vespa, and their metabolic crossover point went longer. They didn't go into carb burning till very end of running at a very fast pace. And then they did one for females, actually. So just to touch on, fat adaptation, Dr. Dan Plu's program, Endure IQ, talks about baseline. Base is kind of starting for a few weeks, monitoring what you're eating. And then phase 2, we take people through eating whole foods, swapping out processed foods, eating real nutrient-rich foods, and then transition to a cold keto phase for 3 weeks that you're going 50 grams of carbs total, adding in the nuts and the seeds, your fats, your non-starchy vegetables. And then females can do that differently, putting that cold keto phase, instead of 3 weeks straight, they'll do it days 7 to 14 of their menstrual cycle and put that in a 2x2 block, spread it out. And then how do you match your nutrition with your training? Well, then baseline, you'll keep your normal program because we're just kind of observing. Phase 2 is using whole foods. They'll keep the routine the same, but reduce the volume by 10%. And then phase 3 is cold keto, where we do it differently for female athletes, but reduce the training load, but add HIIT training. So keep you able to get this little exercise in and support that glycogen need, because you're not burning ketones yet. So you can have that little HIIT workout in there, will really help you. And then phase 4 is finding that sweet spot, gradual increase in training, back up over 2 to 3 weeks. And then you can start to stay here forever and always do that course correct. And things change when you want to adapt. So there's so much more to talk about, and there's so much more I'm going to share on my podcast and my blog, debbiepotts.net. So head to Low Carb Athlete Podcast on YouTube or your favorite audio podcast, and debbiepotts.net for more information. And I'd love to hear from you. So reach out and let me know your questions and how you can learn more about matching your fueling with your training for the endurance athlete and the female endurance athlete, because we are not the same as men. So we're going to tweak it a little bit differently. So lots of fun stuff for putting together, or I am, we is me, and I will teach you a little bit more as I put this all together and put an ebook of all this information together. So hopefully you learned something new, and reach out with your questions, and I'm glad to help. Thanks.